Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Agahi with your host, Warisa Zainab. Unfortunately, for many young people and children, home is not always a safe place to be. Although home is where the heart is, home is where you find peace, contentment, joy, and calmness. But for many children across the globe, it's a place where they're exposed to terror, abuse, mistreatment, and often neglect. In today's episode of Agahi, we're going to talk about a lot of things that results in complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a type of post-traumatic stress disorder, but more complex than that. And unfortunately, many people are not equipped to treat people who show signs and symptoms of trauma. Today with us, we have a fabulous, amazing lady, Fran, Stalley, who is going to join us, who has already joined us actually from UK. And she has always had this dream to write a book since she was a child. And a few months ago, she published her book, which is based on her own experiences of experiencing and surviving childhood abuse. So let's welcome our guest for today. Fran, welcome to Agahi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Really excited to have you. As a child, it often gets trapped in your body. And when you grow up as an adult, you sometimes struggle with certain things, the way you respond to certain situations and people and, circumstances in life. And often people don't realize that it goes back to what they have witnessed or experienced as a child. So first of all, I want you to tell us about your book. I'm really looking forward to read it myself. And tell us about your journey, your experience. How did you, end up publishing this and write up all about it?
So my book is called Childhood Trauma Recovery, and I've always wanted to be a writer, and this was an opportunity. It was my lockdown project, actually. Wow. It was a pandemic project. I thought, how can I keep my maintain my mental health? I needed a project to focus on during lockdown, and this project was helped me with that. And it's always based on my experiences of therapy with a particular therapist, one of the 15 that I've had. Wow. And he was the one who really helped me. And it was his email conversations in between therapy sessions that, because when I was really struggling, I would email him and he would help me. So with his permission, I put them all together into a book.
And you just mentioned 15 therapists.
15 therapists, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And what was the timeline, as in from the day you started going for therapy sessions and when you stopped? How long did it take?
So my first therapist was aged 19 whilst I was at university.
Right.
And I probably saw her for about 12 sessions. Mm-hmm. She was a counsellor, and her attitude was, oh, you're a teenager and you don't get on with your parents. Gosh, we've never seen that before.
Really?
There was no kind of appreciation that my parents could have been abusive. And then and I realized that what she was telling me wasn't really going to help me. It was just like an instinctive feeling of, I'm going to be 90 before I'm helped by anything.
Wow. You had 12, did you say 12 sessions with this counselor?
Yeah, so I had 12 sessions with her. I mean, it was at university, you're limited to the number of sessions that you can have. Yeah. And I didn't, there was no connection with her either. She didn't know how to form a connection with me, and I struggled to make friends and connect with other people. So she was treating the symptoms. She was trying to help me to make friends and get on with people because I was alienating them. But she was doing that without addressing the underlying cause as to why I struggled to make friends and I was alienating people.
Yeah.
I just didn't have the trauma meant that I didn't have the social skills and my nervous system didn't feel safe around people.
Yeah.
So I was interacting with other people, but my nervous system was constantly telling me that I wasn't safe to be around them. So I wasn't picking up on their social signals that they were safe and friendly to be around. And my body language was saying to them, go away, keep away. I don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah.
You know, you're scary. And it was all subconscious. I didn't know I was doing this, but I can see now that that's precisely what I was doing.
At what point did you realize this is not working?
I think fairly early on. Yeah, and I tried, and I had 4 more therapists as whilst I was at university.
And this is after you saw this counselor?
Yeah, these were after saw the counsellor.
Wow.
2 more were through the university. Again, they didn't really help me. One of them was, I think she was CBT. She was trying to help me with my procrastination. But again, she was trying to help me with the procrastination without dealing with the underlying cause as to why I was procrastinating, which was the trauma.
Yeah.
It didn't help me. And then I had a hypnotherapist, 2 hypnotherapists, one of whom did a soul retrieval with me. He promised me a 100% success rate, which
wow,
I don't think.
That's a big claim to make. Did it also say no money back, like guarantee or something? Wow.
And after that, I felt it stirred up all the suppressed trauma memories, and I couldn't cope with the intensity of the emotions that he stirred up. I honestly felt like I was going to go mad. And when I phoned him for help, he told me to listen to my relaxation tape. He had no idea what he had stirred up. No idea at all.
So it sounds like he kind of resurfaced whatever was suppressed in your unconsciousness, the painful memories and everything else, and then just left you in that vulnerable state, like hanging in the middle, not knowing what to do next. Just telling you to relax and take deep breaths, inhale and exhale, right? Okay, sounds interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. He didn't know what he was doing.
Wow.
He really didn't. And then I had a fairly big gap of quite a few years, 7 years, of not having a therapist, really struggling with my work. I was desperate for meaningful work, but I ended up doing secretarial work, which wasn't suited to my personality. I had a biology degree, and it's like anything that was work related, I just came up against a really big block. And I found out years later the reason why. There was massive trauma underlying it. And until that was resolved, I wasn't going to be able to sort out my work issues.
And throughout this process, from moving on from one professional to another and then another, so you had 5, you had seen 5 professionals so far, and none of them really helped because their focus was on the presenting symptoms, but not really trying to figure out the source, where it's originating from, and whether they should kind of work on the actual healing of the wounds that originate from your childhood.
They had no way of knowing or of finding out whether I had been abused or not. I did have one therapist who suspected that I had been abused, and she told me this. But I was 20, and she advised me not to keep in touch with my family, which now I can see, yeah, that's really good advice. But at the time, I just didn't. Yeah. That was too big a step for me, because I had no other kind of social support.
Yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes, often we're told that the decision has to come from within. We are the ones who have to make that decision, whether we want to stay in that environment which is hostile or harmful, or whether we should move out. But regardless, the victim has to make that decision, him or herself. The professional that you're seeking cannot kind of instruct you without figuring out what your circumstances are, without having like a safety plan in place. And like you said, it wasn't possible for you during that time to actually move away from your family. How long were you subjected to mistreatment by your caregivers, by your parents?
The abuse started in infancy and continued throughout my childhood. And psychological abuse from my mum continued until her death when I was aged 40.
Wow. Yeah. And were you still living with her, like in the same house?
At certain points, yes, I was. And she turned the people who she knew, and therefore I knew, against me. So I was the bad apple. I was the black sheep. It was all me. And she was very manipulative and managed to manipulate people against me. So it looked like it was all me and nothing to do with her.
Yeah. Were there any other people involved, or was it just her?
It was both my parents.
What about your siblings? Were they also on the receiving end?
It's hard for me to say, and it's not my place to talk about them.
Fair enough. And in that environment, was there any person, like a teacher or a friend, a neighbor or relative, with whom you could confide in or trust and share your experiences with? Or were you just suffering in silence the whole time?
There was nobody who believed me. I think people, whenever I tried to tell anybody, they were so like, oh my gosh, no, that's too shocking. Even now as an adult, if I tell people, especially if they happen to know my mother, they don't want to believe that there are people like that.
So you have shared your story, your experiences in your book. And I'm sure a lot of people will be able to relate to the experiences that you've had. Some people have the courage to speak about it, to share it with others. But there are still many people who find it really difficult to, first of all, acknowledge that it happened, because I'm sure you have come across a lot of studies and researches as well where the child doesn't really figure out what's going on, and they perceive that kind of behavior as normal, and they form like a trauma bond with the perpetrator. At what point did you realize that this is actually abuse?
Well, I knew that I suspected that my dad had abused me, but my mind didn't want to comprehend that my mother had also been abusive. And so I didn't realize that she had been, I knew that she picked on me, that she bullied me. But I didn't realize that she had been implicated, probably the ringleader of the abuse, until after I'd received therapy after she'd died. So it didn't come out until after she had died. And when it did start to come out, again, I felt like I was going to go mad, because it was just too horrendous for me to comprehend. And it didn't help that I was having therapy on the NHS, the UK's healthcare system, and the therapy I received wasn't continuous. It was kind of in blocks of 12 sessions, and you'd have a break in between the block. And this particular knowledge about my mum came out in the break between my second and my third block of therapy. And so my therapist wasn't available to me. And so I was facing this by myself, which made it even harder.
Yeah. So by the time you finished the therapeutic sessions with the fourth therapist, and you still felt that your needs haven't been met as a client, as a patient, when did you decide to go for another one?
It was when I think I was 30, and it was an EFT therapist. So EFT is something else that's regularly used to treat trauma. I didn't find it helpful for my trauma. The only thing that has helped me was the EMDR, which is suited to treating trauma. However, I have been re-traumatized and left suicidal by one EMDR therapist that I saw on the NHS, because although he was treating trauma, he didn't understand it. He didn't understand not to put me out of control, because trauma is being put out of control. It's being forced to do something that you don't want to do. So if at any time the therapist appears as though they are trying to force you to do anything that you don't want to do, they're going to tune in all the traumas and potentially re-traumatize you. And that is what happened to me.
And what did you do at that point? Did you speak to someone about it? Your deputy or your...
No. And my reason for doing that, for not wanting to, well, I tried to phone the NHS, the IAPT service, and they didn't want to know. I'd had my sessions and I couldn't have any more. I didn't phone my GP because I was afraid of being sectioned, which is hospitalized. And the reason why I was afraid is because, again, it would be forced to do something that I didn't want to do. And it would have put me out of control. So it would again have mirrored my traumas. And it's just very fortunate that I stumbled across a therapist quite by chance. He was an EMDR therapist who specialized in treating complex trauma. I didn't know to look for a therapist who specialized in treating complex trauma. It just happened quite by chance, and it made all the difference.
You know, there are so many people out there who do consider seeking help for the symptoms that they show as a result of post-traumatic stress. But not everybody is aware of the different kinds of therapy that is available out there, the different kinds of therapists that are out there. So their first point of contact would be going to their GP, talking to their GP about the symptoms, whether it's migraines or palpitations or nightmares or what have you. And then GP is the first point of contact who will then refer you to somebody, or maybe just prescribe anxiety medication, which we often see is the case. What was your experience when you first went to your GP? Did they put you on medication straight away? Did they refer you for counseling? What happened?
I went saw my GP for therapy, and my mum had just died. So and the thing is, because I'd been told by my mum, nothing happened. It's all in your mind. What are you talking about? It's like I doubted that I had been abused. And because my symptoms had always been kind of blamed on me, that it was a defect in me. I was abnormal in some way. They weren't symptoms of trauma. They were me being weird. It's like, oh, my mum dying suddenly seemed like a good enough excuse. This is something that if I seek therapy, they will take seriously.
Yeah.
I had complex PTSD, but I didn't think that I didn't know that that's what I had.
So when was it diagnosed for the first time? Who diagnosed it?
It was because all of the trauma that came out. It was the complexity of the abuse and the trauma that I experienced. So no, my GP didn't give me antidepressants, and I wouldn't have taken them if he had. But it's apparently very common for people who are actively having flashbacks.
Yes.
They will go and seek treatment for something else. They won't go and seek treatment for the flashbacks. And it's like they get help with the flashbacks as a side effect of going for something completely different.
Yeah.
And I think that's because we don't realize what the symptoms of trauma are. We don't realize that we're suffering from PTSD or CPTSD.
Fran, you mentioned earlier on that you were experiencing some really strong emotions, and you even had thoughts around attempting suicide. So how did you manage these thoughts? What helped you with the suicidal ideation that you were struggling with at the time?
Nothing that I did helped me. Mm-hmm. Everything that I did, I slid from thinking about suicide to I am going to kill myself. Because I had asked for help from IAPT and they didn't want to know. So it seemed like I couldn't get help. And I started back into work, and that was the trigger.
Right.
Because my IAPT therapist had told me that in order to overcome my issues with work, I had to expose myself to work. But when I did that, it ended up re-traumatizing me. And this also put me in a bind because it seemed that I couldn't progress without having therapy, but therapy was re-traumatizing me. So I was just very incredibly fortunate that the therapist that I sought help from prior to, I booked a session with him and paid for it. That was the most important thing. Prior to starting work and becoming suicidal, where I was planning. I'd gone from thinking about it to I've gone from the cry for help stage to the I am going to kill myself stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had paid for this session, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to keep it. And I spent that session planning how I was going to kill myself afterwards. I'm just incredibly fortunate that my therapist uttered these words to me, because the reason why I had been like, oh, therapy can't help me, all the therapists are the same. If I have therapy, it's just going to keep making me worse. And he said, I will not try and force you to do anything that you don't want to do, because if I do that, I will tune in your traumas. I will appear to your nervous system like one of your abusers. And I was like, the relief was just unbelievable. And and it's like I had to reorient myself from I'm going to kill myself to oh my gosh, I've got a therapist who understands trauma.
Wow.
Yeah.
It must have been a breakthrough for you. All
It
these
was.
years of, because you mentioned you started at the age of 19. That's the first time you actually went to see somebody.
Yeah.
And from then onwards to the age of 30, when you had your, I think, fourth.
Yeah, no, but this therapist, the one who really helped me, he was therapist number 11, I think, 10 or 11. Yeah.
You know what's interesting is, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, most people in your shoes would have given up. Right?
Yes.
I think trying one therapy, trying another one, not working, maybe third one, and then they would have been like, you know what? This is not for me. It's not helping me. Forget it.
Well, I have actually met people who have told me they've had more therapists than I have. So my situation is not unusual. It seems to be that if you have CPTSD, because it's treated by mental health is treated by generalists and not specialists, that they you end up with lots of therapists who don't know what they're doing, can make their client worse at worst, or not help them at best.
It's just like if you have coronary heart disease, for example, you are not going to go to an eye specialist, or you're not going to go to a dermatologist. And in order for you to figure out that the palpitations or the chest pain or the increase in blood pressure or associated headaches that you're having, it's because there is something not right with your heart. But for someone to point that out, that it's this organ that needs to be treated, not your skin, not your eyes, not your hair, for you to reach that level, that point, you need someone who's going to make the right diagnosis and who's going to point you in the right direction, that this is the kind of therapy or this is the treatment intervention that is going to help you. So for people who are in a similar position like you, Fran, and say, for example, they have never been for therapy because they are clueless, and maybe they tried going to their GP, but you know the 5-minute rule that you can only present one symptom at a time, not more than 5 minutes. Now, someone who has been through so much, 5 minutes is not going to help. You know, you need more time to sit with the doctor and explain to them what's really happening, what's going on. And sometimes people themselves don't know what's going on. They don't know why their body is reacting in a certain way, or, you know, they don't understand their symptoms. What would you say to these people?
If you suspect childhood trauma, even if you can't remember it, because amnesia is a common symptom of childhood trauma, see a trauma specialist. I would look for an EMDR therapist on the EMDR Association website. That's the UK one. There will be others worldwide. Find an EMDR therapist, but look for somebody who specializes in complex trauma. And how you know whether they're a specialist or a generalist is because they will just treat complex trauma. They won't treat 20 other things. They will just treat trauma.
EMDR, what does it stand for?
It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a very long mouthful and probably doesn't really tell anybody anything more about what it actually is.
Yeah.
But it's one of the few things that really does work for trauma.
Yes, and I think we have enough scientific evidence to prove that.
Yes.
Where, people have returned from war zones, people who served in the army or the Air Force, or, they were part of the force that experienced traumatic stress and horrific forms of trauma. And we have enough evidence to prove that EMDR was quite beneficial, quite helpful in treating the symptoms of complex PTSD. Would you mind sharing some of the symptoms so that our viewers can kind of understand what CPTSD is in the first place?
It's a whole range of, it impacted every area of my life.
Mm.
So my ability to form relationships, work, relax, manage my emotions, see other people as, I saw everybody as a threat. That was quite a common thing. I would suddenly be overwhelmed by intense emotions that came seemingly out of nowhere and would knock me for six, and they would affect me for days, sometimes even weeks at a time. I had no idea what they were and why I was feeling that way. What I now realize is that they were feeling flashbacks. So they were a trauma trigger. I was reliving a trauma, but because it was likely pre-verbal, there was no image and there was no sound, which is, you usually get an image with regular flashbacks, but with feeling flashbacks, you just get the feeling. Because it's pre-verbal, there's no words to go with it.
And like you said, it comes out of the blue, out of nowhere, and you can't really figure out what triggered it, right?
Yes.
So what role did your therapist play in helping you figure out what are the triggers and what can you do to cope or help or manage those symptoms?
For me, it was the EMDR that processing the traumas automatically reduced my symptoms. So I think that I haven't had a flashback for over 2 years. I haven't dissociated for nearly 3 years. I haven't had a panic attack for about 5 years. So that is the EMDR, because it processes the trauma rather than it just teaching you, rather than your therapist just teaching you how to manage your symptoms. I don't want to learn how to manage my symptoms. I want to be free of them.
Yes.
And the EMDR is the only thing that enabled me to be able to do that. I mean, there is the polyvagal theory as well.
Oh, yes.
Which is about keeping you within the window of tolerance and recognizing when I was outside of the window of tolerance, whether I was hypo-aroused or hyper-aroused, was really helpful as well.
Is that quite similar to when people go into fight, flight, or freeze mode when they're exposed to the stressor?
Yeah. So the window of tolerance is when the nervous system feels safe. You can go about your daily business and live your life. And when you're outside of the window of tolerance, you've been either flung into fight, flight, or freeze shutdown.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the polyvagal theory that you mentioned, and what's the link between your physical body and the memories that are trapped within. And another interesting point you mentioned, Fran, that these memories go back to a stage in life when you were so young that you couldn't even process it, as a child, as a toddler, as an infant. Um, but it somehow gets trapped in your body. You may not realize it in your adulthood, but the memory is still there.
Yes, yes. The kind of pain that you experienced, or the memory of it gets trapped in the body.
What helped?
The EMDR again. I mean, because it's common for people with a history of complex trauma to end up with either physical health symptoms such as chronic back pain, autoimmune diseases, increased risk for cancer, and stroke, heart disease, all kind of the major diseases.
Yes.
If you're under a really high risk for suicide, all those diseases are you are to have much higher risk of developing them if you have a history of trauma.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
The symptom that I had was chronic back pain. So I had chronic back pain for 20 years. And I am just incredibly fortunate that my therapist, the one who helped me, the trauma specialist, had also worked with chronic pain.
Wow.
So we used the EMDR on my chronic back pain, and it cleared it up.
Wow.
So EMDR can work for physical symptoms as well.
Finally, something worked. Yeah.
Yes. Because I'd been to see my GP, and all I'd received was painkillers. But I don't want to keep taking painkillers.
Nah. Painkiller, as the name implies, it kills the pain temporarily. In fact, I don't even agree with the term killer, because it doesn't really kill. It's still there, maybe unconscious. Maybe the pain becomes unconscious or sedated, or I don't know. But it's still there, because what's causing the pain that is still there. So unless and until you target that, the cause, the root factor, you will never find the ultimate cure, as they say. If I could, change two things about the way mental health is treated, what would they be? If you could change.
If I could change them, the main thing that I would change is for mental health to be treated by specialists in the same way that physical health is treated. So you see a specialist. If you have an eating disorder, you see an eating disorder specialist. If you have CPTSD, you see a trauma specialist. You don't end up seeing a generalist counsellor, because the odds of you not being helped are high.
Yeah.
Risk of you being made worse is well, in my experience, it's common. It's common to be made worse. And the problem with trauma is that the belief that you can't be, trauma makes you believe that you can't be helped, that nothing you do will make any difference, because when you were being abused, nothing you did back then made any difference. So if you continue to have therapy that doesn't help you, it just reinforces the belief that that nothing you do will make any difference now.
I think what we need to understand is that any form of trauma is itself not a mental illness. Trauma is a mental injury, which, like any other form of injury, needs to be healed. And the healing process is not going to happen overnight. and nobody can make a claim that it will be treated 100% money back guarantee in just 10 sessions or 12 sessions. No, because as humans, as individuals, we are unique. Every individual is different. Their experiences are different. The severity of the symptoms are different. So you can't have like one formula for all or one approach for everybody. Everybody's different. Like for some, hypnotherapy works, but for others, maybe they're not susceptible to hypnosis. So in your own personal experience, you know what worked and what didn't, and you didn't give up. And I think that's pretty amazing. I can't even imagine, if I was in therapy and I was disappointed by one professional and then moving on to another one, and in the end going for 15 different ones. In your opinion, Fran, what do you think are the three main components of successful therapy for complex PTSD?
For complex PTSD, it's the type of therapy that you're receiving. So I would recommend EMDR. It's seeing a therapist who is a trauma specialist. So you're seeing somebody who really understands complex trauma, how it is affecting your nervous system and the therapeutic relationship. And also, you have to get on with the therapist. There has to be a connection. You have to gel with them. And that's just the chemistry between the therapist and client, but it is really important. I have had a really good EMDR therapist who she really helped me, but I stopped seeing her because there was no connection. And I think, looking back now, I think it's just because she was in her 50s and she reminded me of my mum when she was abusing me.
So that's,
I mean, that's not something that...
Yeah, like you mentioned earlier, that the way your body and your mind reacts after having these experiences, when you're constantly walking on eggshells, then you feel threatened by anyone and anything. So if you come across something which brings back memories or which triggers something, or a person or an event which may be similar to what you have encountered in the past, then chances are you will have a relapse. And often people think they have healed, they have moved on, and it's been such a long time, it's been over a decade. I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay. But then something happens and there you are. You have a relapse and you're back to square one.
With the EMDR, it can feel like you're back to square one.
Mm-hmm.
But in my experience, I get over it faster.
Wow.
And the great thing about the EMDR is the more you have, the faster you process and the less distressing it is. But I'm going to say something about EMDR. It can seem like it's going to be very distressing, but there is something now called the flash technique, which which lessens the distress of it. And the other great thing about EMDR is, especially for people who feel a lot of shame around the trauma that they have, you don't have to tell the therapist what it is.
Yeah.
You can have the blind to therapist protocol so that you are processing using the EMDR, but you don't have to tell your therapist what it is. And I think that's hugely important because there is often so much shame and fear and guilt around certain traumas,
Mm.
be able to process it without having to tell somebody what it is, I think can make all the difference between somebody actually going for help and getting that help and believing that and being too afraid to do so.
And it took you good 25 years to get there. That is
I know, yeah.
very long time. And
it is, I know. And lots of money, £20,000.
no, wow, wow. But in a way, you know, it was worth it. The investment.
No, it was worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was worth it in the end. But I think the earlier therapists had no idea about trauma, no idea at all.
You have published several, you know, researches and articles and books. So you shared one of the books in the beginning of this program about recovering from childhood trauma. Tell us more about your other publications.
So I've written an article for the Psychologist website, which is the website for the British Psychological Society. That's called New Therapist, New Hope. That's an extract from my first book. And my second book is due out soon, and that is about my 15 therapists. I've split it into, so it's the first 8 therapists that I saw, and then the second book will be the IAPT therapist, the NHS therapist that I saw, and then the third book will be mainly about the therapist who really helped me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what you must have gone through from the age of 19 to going through like this whole process until you found the right person who could actually help you with the underlying, you know, causes, and finally, you know, to live a fulfilling life, the one that you've always dreamed of. And after all the sacrifices that you made financially, with your time and emotions, and the roller coaster ride that you had, you're finally there. Any last words of wisdom you would like to share with our viewers out there who may be in a similar position that you were in a few years ago?
Yes, it is possible to overcome CPTSD. You have to want it, and you have to find the right therapist, a trauma specialist who uses EMDR. But it is possible. If you're early on in your therapy journey, look for a specialist. It's your best bet at recovery. No guarantees, but it's the best bet.
Where can people look? Where can people search or find? Or
the EMDR Association is the UK website, and there are similar affiliated websites for worldwide.
Any support groups for survivors of childhood sexual abuse or any form of childhood abuse?
I'm setting one up.
There you go.
They can contact me.
Brilliant. To all the viewers who are watching, if you have any questions for Fran and you would like to connect with her, or you're interested in reading her book, or if you want any other information or even share your experiences or feedback, please do so by calling in our studio number. You can also visit our Hidayat TV's Facebook page or YouTube channel to leave your comments, your feedback, because it's valuable for us. And if you have any questions, please call in our studio, leave your details with us, and we will get back to you. Fran, thank you so much for this amazing discussion that we had today, and for taking the time out to discuss such important elements of being in a therapeutic, relationship, and for sharing your experiences, for giving the advice that I'm sure our viewers will really benefit from. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And for all our viewers, we'll join you again next Saturday at 12 p.m. on Hidayat TV with another guest, another topic related to your well-being. Till then, look after your mental health. Assalamu alaikum.